Welcome back to WagerTalk.com. Saturday Final Four action. We've got Oregon and North Carolina. I'm joined by Ralph Michaels and Preston, the sports cheetah. Guys, a question I got to throw out to you to start this one off. Oregon against Kansas. Was this a situation where this was just an off shooting night for Kansas, or was this Oregon defense this good? Start with you, Preston.
Yeah, they were off. A lot of their looks were really good. I think a lot of people are giving crap for losing that game for them. But if they're missing a bunch of wide open threes, there's nothing you can do. Now, what was very, very fantastic for Oregon was the fact that when Kansas did try to go inside, Bell blocked 8 of their shots, altered more. And so they couldn't get anything inside, so they reverted to shooting threes, and they were cold that night. I will say the fact that this number is 4.5, 5 in this North Carolina matchup, I think is very telling as to how bad that Oregon +7, 6.5 number was. It never should have been that high. Kansas, because of that thumping, I think they beat Purdue by 30 that game before. It was a pretty bad line. Kansas, they are the better team, but I think if you bet Oregon, I thought that was a great bet. And Kansas, on their, I guess what's it called, the short weekend, that second game of the Sweet 16 or the second game of opening weekend, Self's kind of had some history there where he can't get that second game nearly as often as those first ones when he has short time to prep. And I think Oregon had the coaching advantage too. And if they were basically saying, beat us hitting the three and you can't do it, go ahead. And it was interesting because Kansas didn't miss, that weekend prior from three. So kind of just a nice regression that favored the Ducks.
Yeah, and going to you, Ralph, you look at prior to holding Kansas to 35% from the field, their 4 previous games, Oregon allowed 43, 50, 43, and 58% shooting. Now they're going to be going against a North Carolina team coming off a tough game against Kentucky. That thing went back and forth down the stretch. Big shots by both teams late. North Carolina escapes. How do you see this one going into Saturday?
I think that close game helps North Carolina coming back, knowing you could beat anyone. It doesn't matter. Cheetah, going back to you, I think part of the reason that line was so inflated was, Kansas thumped Purdue, but I think so many people associated that thumping with being in Kansas City, adding to that home court edge, and I think that just inflated the line. But, Kansas is the number 5 team in the country shooting three-pointers. They shot 40%. So for them going 5 of 25, it made Oregon look a lot better. But you look at who Oregon's faced. In the second round, they faced Rhode Island, Michigan, Kansas. No bigs there at all. Kansas's number 4 is Josh Jackson, 6'8", their center. Landon Lucas, 6'10". Now they got to face the bigs of North Carolina. Kennedy Meek, 6'10". Isaiah Hicks, 6'9", but 235. All you got for a big on the Oregon side is Jordan Bell, who has stayed out of foul trouble. He only has 3 fouls in these first 4 games. I think Kansas can get him in foul trouble, and then they're really going to miss Boucher and his rebounding. So, I look at North Carolina, the number 2 rebounding team, going to be able to get the ball inside. The only thing to worry about with North Carolina is Joe Barry. He didn't practice last night. He screwed up both of their ankles. They need him. They need his scoring. They need his assists. But if Barry's healthy, with the size advantage, with Oregon not having faced any bigs this entire tournament, I think there's a big matchup edge to North Carolina.
Preston, the 2 games that North Carolina had close games were against Arkansas and against Kentucky. The 2 common denominators in that game that stuck out to me was the fact that North Carolina had high turnovers in both of those games. They had 17 turnovers against Arkansas and 16 turnovers against Kentucky. Oregon's not a team that gets turnovers. In the last 2 games, they only had 8 turnovers each against Michigan and Kansas. So I look for North Carolina to come out of this one. I think North Carolina rolls and the clock strikes midnight for Cinderella, Oregon. How do you see this one?
I've mentioned a few times this week in other spots that I actually think Barry is obviously injured and the ankle's bugging him pretty badly, whether it's the turnovers, whether it's the fact he can't hit a jumper or a 3, or he can't run a pick and roll. Their offense has really struggled, I think. I mean, even in that Kentucky game, he hurt the other ankle now. He had to leave the game for a while, and then he came back. But I think that's pretty evident that he's hurting. Whether you have 4 or 5 days off, I think it definitely favors Oregon to that extent. If they can dominate inside and they don't need the 3-point shooting, and he can limit the turnovers, then yes, I think North Carolina's an edge and they should win the game. But if I was inclined to actually take a bet on the side, I would probably wait it out, see if I can get a 5.5 with Oregon. And I'd probably take the Ducks, actually. Something just doesn't sit right with what I've seen from Barry and the North Carolina offense, because they've looked out of sorts in a couple of those games, and I attribute it to that. And, if he's not hitting he's their main outside threat. Jackson can hit threes too. Outside of those two, they don't really have one. So they better be, shooting 80% from the paint or something. Otherwise, Oregon's offense is good enough to keep up.
Barry also gives the other three-point shooters room by driving in and passing the ball out.
Sure.
So that's what they missed.
Sure.
Those three-point shooters are much more contested. I'm still going to lean with North Carolina in this one.
All right, there you go. And guys, don't forget, you want to save $10 this weekend. Use coupon code FINAL4. You'll be able to take $10 off any package at Wager Talk this week. We'll be back with more here at WagerTalk.com.